Hi, so the idea of this video is just to go over some kind of standard procedures for deployment options which are not necessarily obvious. If you've reviewed the architecture for what I've built, at the moment at least, there's a auto-scaling layer, a web server layer, an image or assets server layer, and a database layer. The ones that we're really interested in this video are the web servers and the image servers, because the image servers share a directory over SSHFS with each of the web servers. So if you have 5 web servers running, they all share the same directory, which is remote mounted to their web root from the image server. So one of the things that cloud service providers offer is block storage, where you can extend the disk capacity of a machine by adding block storage volumes. So perhaps you don't need much space on your image server for your application, in which case you can just use the ordinary disk that comes with the compute instance. But if you're getting into an application which has a lot of assets like images and media and so on that you're sharing between your web servers, then you need to, or you could use block storage to increase your disk space capacity without necessarily having to go higher on the compute capacity that you're provisioning. The reason why the media and images are shared is obviously for a consistent experience. If you have each web server with a different web root for media and a user uploads an image, then if the load balancing chooses a different web server next time round or for any other user, then that image won't be available, and then you get into doing rsyncs and stuff like that with the different file systems. So the way I chose to do it was to just have a single point of truth on the image servers, media servers or asset servers or whatever you want to call them, and present that to each of the web servers over SSHFS. That's the basic architecture of it. If your application can use a CDN, which not all applications can, then you don't need an asset server at all, and you just serve it from a CDN based system. But this is there for applications for which a CDN can't be used, and I personally have at least one of those. So what you want to do is work out how to attach block storage to an assets server at build time. So the standard procedure is you run through your configuration parameters when you run the build script. That then deploys the autoscalers, a first web server, and then you get into the database, and then finally the assets server. So when you create a compute instance on most cloud hosts, those that support block storage, it won't have block storage attached to it, and you have to manually attach block storage to your instance. So what I do is, as soon as the instance is created for the asset server, I pause the script and say, hey, do you want to add any block storage to this instance? and then whoever's deploying it can go to their GUI for the cloud host that they're using and simply provision and attach as many block storage disks as they want to satisfy their application requirements. So in the application that I'm considering here, we have images and media. They're the two different mount points under var www.html/html. So I provision 2 block storage volumes and then mount them under the web root of the particular image server, which is then SSFHS mounted to the web servers in turn. It's resilient. It just sounds more complicated than it perhaps is. So the other thing that happens is the image servers sync to a data store in the cloud. So the standard data store that people would think of is either Amazon S3 or Google Cloud data store or something like that, although I think there's 5 different types of data store that I support at the moment. So whenever new media is added to the image server through user interaction, it's synced with a data store which keeps it persistent between deployments. So if something were to go wrong, or you just take the deployment down or whatever, then the image server syncs itself with whatever the latest is in the data store. So there's quite a lot going on here, because the data store is syncing potentially with a block storage volume now, because we've added a block storage volume. So what I want to do is, because this sounds more convoluted than it is, I just wanted to run through a scenario of how to add block storage and when to add block storage to your assets or image servers when you're deploying your application. So at the moment you can see there's no servers running on the this is the DigitalOcean cloud provider. So what we'll do is I'll run through I've shown elsewhere in other videos how to do the deployment. When I'll run through it, and then when we get to the image or assets server part of the build process, I'll pause this video. I'll pause this video, and then I'll pause the deployment and show you how to add the block storage to your assets or image servers. Okay, I hope that's clear. So basically I'm going to run through a deployment now, and the next thing you'll see in this video is when it gets to the point where I would add block storage. And thanks for listening. See you in a bit. Hello again. So I've made a deployment according to the instructions you can find in one of the other videos for this toolkit, and I've paused it, or it's paused itself I should say, when it gets to the point where it's building the image server or the assets server, and I may wish to, it's asking, do I wish to attach block storage to this compute instance. So we're using DigitalOcean. Now this will be different for each different provider, and obviously the provider has to support block storage. So if we just refresh the screen, we should see the droplets or compute instances that have been deployed, and you can see there's an autoscaler, web server, database, and the image server, which has only just started to build 4 minutes ago. So what we want to do is attach some block storage. Now you can see here there's the option volumes. So a volume is a block storage disk basically. So when we click on volumes, we can attach our volumes to a droplet. I didn't realise these were here. They were created 3 hours ago, so let's just delete these. I don't need them. I'll show you how to create the volumes then. So they were unattached, they were just sitting there waiting basically. So that's what it would look like ordinarily. So if I want to add a volume, just click add volume. You then enter the size, so let's just make it a 5 GB one, and then you select the droplet that you want to attach it to. So that's our image server. So we can give it a name pertinent to what we want to do. So we say images, oops, vol. Okay, and so you could perhaps add more description, like the particular application it's for. So let's add that in. So let's just create that volume, and then it gives us a whole bunch of provider specific instructions for what we have to do to our droplet to attach that volume. So we have to SSH onto our droplet. So if I just bring up another window, now as you know there's helper scripts to help with that. So if we just do we want to connect to the image server, so we'll take that one and use that, and then we can see it's a DigitalOcean so because it hasn't completed its build yet, there's an oversight on this script. It hasn't changed the port number for the SSH yet. So if I just grab this instruction here, paste it, and then remove the port setting, it's because it's a partial build of the instance at the moment, and then it will allow us to log in. Then we want to we need the root user or the password to be able to do a sudo. So that's stored here. You can see the path to it here. So if you want to get a copy of your server user password, you just do and then that's the password. So paste that in there. Now we're as root, I believe. So we need to be root to issue these commands that DigitalOcean are asking us to issue in order to make the volume available. So we copy that. So this just formats the volume, and then we on our images server, see the name there? Oops, images server. We just paste that command in, and that runs. The next thing then, what's the next command from DigitalOcean. So we copy that and then we issue it, but we have to change the mount points here. Now it's quite an involved command, but the first thing we want to do then is to make the directory we're going to mount to. So that'll be var www.html images. This will be different on an application by application basis. So then we want this one, var, and then the last one is this one, and then we issue the command, and we should then see, we can see there's this file lost and found, which means that the volume in that directory is now a block storage volume. So lots of additional file space. So the next thing then is we have two directories we want mounted, so we can OK that. So we have two directories that we want mounted for this particular application, images and media. So we need to create another volume. Again, we can make it 5 gigabytes, and we want to attach it to the same droplet, and we can call it media vol and just create that, and then we just have to repeat the process. So we need to format it again, and on our images server. So again, these instructions will vary by provider. This is DigitalOcean specific instructions for adding block storage. So we issue the command again, and we have to change our mount points again. Media, and then one more, so there's 3 to change each time. Make sure they're correct, otherwise it will mess up, and that's just a whole waste of time then. So make sure that you've entered the mount points correctly, and just hit the enter key, and you should now have a lost and found file on your second mount point. So what will now happen is, because we set the build time option to use the data store, the media that's there for this particular application will now be downloaded to these block storage partitions. So that's the next part of the build process, is to populate these out with the information from the data store. Okay, that it's a bit difficult to explain, but if you're deploying a baseline version of your application, then the mechanism is slightly different. But whenever you're deploying from a backup, hourly, daily, monthly, weekly, etc., then this is the way it will work. So we can exit from our images server, safe in the knowledge that all's well, return to our build process, and just hit the enter key to allow the build to complete and our block storage volumes to be populated with the data that the application requires from the data store, such as Amazon S3 Google Cloud or whatever it's configured to be. Okay, let's give it a go. Hi again. So you can see that the build is completed as it says here. So let's just check on our image server. So we're back on the image server, it's been renamed now, and we're in our web root. So if we check in the images directory, we can see that all the images for the application have been downloaded from the long-term persistent data store. This lost and found file is the one that was generated when we were mounting the block storage, and the same with the media directory. We can see it here, and again that has its lost and found file. So all our assets are now available for our application to use. And if we look here, I've already been there, but if you notice the images and stuff, that's coming from our block storage, directly from the block storage mounted to our web servers. Okay, so if we look back on our DigitalOcean side of things, if we look at the droplets, we can see that we're configured to just have one web server, database, autoscaler, and the assets server or images server. So the whole point of, well, one of the major points of messing about with all these volumes and block storages and so on is that you can take down your deployment, but if you leave the volumes, then the next time that you deploy your application, it can get all its assets from the volumes that you've left from this deployment, if that makes any sense, because getting all your assets from a data store takes time, and a lot of time if there's a lot of assets. You know, if you've got 3 gigabytes of assets or something for your application, then if you're downloading all that from your data store, it's going to take quite a while. So what you can do is you can deploy once and then never take your block storage volumes offline, so that you always leave them there, and they're also incrementally backed up to your data store. And then what you do is the next time you deploy the same application, obviously, so the new Oceal application, there's a flag that you can set. Let's see if we can find it. So DigitalOcean provider, here's all our configuration. So if we look down at the bottom, use data store 0 means that it won't look in the data store when it's doing its initial deployment, and will instead use the attached volumes, right? So if that's set to 1, it will look in the data store. Okay, so that's the idea of that. I'll show you another deployment after this one, which will be, well, let's do that anyway. Let's leave our volumes there, then they'll persist. So this has got all our assets on it for the new Oceal application that we deployed. And let's go back to our droplets, and we can just destroy these. It won't destroy the volumes, at least not with this provider. So we just destroy them, and then we're going to redeploy it, and just use the it's only because I don't need the application. Normally you'd run the shutdown scripts rather than just killing them like this. So that would be a clean shutdown, but this is just testing, so it doesn't matter so much. And I should have shut the autoscaler down first, otherwise it might start spawning web servers again. So that's all our droplets gone, but our volumes still exist with any luck. Just refresh the page. Volumes, they should still be there. Hello. Okay, so there they are. So there's no so they're unattached from a droplet, so they've detached themselves when we shut them down. Okay. So we're going to do another deployment. We've set the use data store to 0, so it won't look in our data store for any of our assets or images. And we're going to use the data that's on these block storage devices from the last deployment that we did. Okay. I hope all this is clear. As you get used to using this toolkit, it becomes much more obvious. So I'm just going to run through and do a deployment now, and I'll show you what I do once we get to the asset servers again. So let's just pause the video. Hi again. So I've run the build again, and the two block storage devices are ready to be added to our images server. So there's the compute servers running, and we just need to go to our volumes. And attach to the image server. And a minute, okay, I've done the media one first. So we have to go through our configuration again. Now this time, because they've already got data on them from our previous build, we don't do this one, so it's got a big warning message here. I only do this if it will raise all data on the volume, but the volume is already formatted and populated with data. So what we have to do is get onto our new image server, which we can do using our helper scripts. And again, because it's only a partially built machine, the port number hasn't been changed yet, so it's still set to the default of 22. As part of the build process, we set the SSH to an arbitrary port as configured by the build script. So the reason for that is just, well, I suppose it's slightly safer because no one knows which port it's on till they probe it. So the next thing then is to get the latest password, which is there. So we just copy that. That enables us to switch to the root user. So we're now on the brand new image server as root. Now if we look here, there should be no such file or directory. So what we do is we grab our command from our droplet. So copy that and modify it to be for our media directory, because that's the one I did first. So the purpose of all this palaver is it's just a lot quicker to do the build when you have a lot of assets in your data store. So it's more complicated, you can't just leave it to run, but it's quicker. So let's do that. So now if we do, see, all our media is already there. Didn't have to mess about with anything. So then we do the other volume for the images. You could have more of these depending on your application, maybe 3 or 4. And then we just do that, change our directories again, images this time. Always make sure that you get these paths exactly correct, otherwise it will mess up and you might have to do the whole build again. And one more. And then when we look in, they're there too. So that's our image server built now. So it's just a matter of allowing the build process to complete. So we go back to our, here we press the enter key. I'll pause it, the video that is, and in a couple of minutes I'll show you the website running. Hi again, so you can see that the build is completed using the block storage devices for the media and images. So just to be clear, most of the time you're going to want to use your data store as your source of images and media, but if your application has large volumes or a large amount of media and images, then it will take a long time to download from the data store when you're provisioning your images server. So a quicker way is to have your volumes as we've demonstrated. You know, if you've got 3 gigabytes of data, of images and media assets and so on, then the quicker way is just have your volumes, detach them when you take your servers down, and then reattach them as part of the build process, as hopefully was shown in this video. So you can just see the website is online, and the images that are shown here are from the previous build, from 2 builds back, and they've been reused from the block storage devices for this new build. Okay, I just hope that's clear. Most applications you can get away with using the data store, but if you have a large amount of assets like media and images, then the best way to do it is to use block storage. And obviously the provider that you deploy to has to support block storage as well. So in this case DigitalOcean does, so that might constrain which provider you decide to deploy your application to. Of course, if this is a social network type application, so people can add images, you know, you post an image to your news feed here, or whatever you call it, your status page, and that's going to be stored on the file system somewhere. So over time this application's media and images footprint will grow. So I may well start out deploying it as straight from the data store when there's maybe 200 megabytes of images and stuff, but after maybe 1 or 2 years of usage, maybe there's 3, 4, 5 gigabytes of images. So whilst the data store can accommodate that level of data, you don't want to be downloading 5 gigabytes every time you want to initialize your image server. So in that case, you want to transition to using a block storage model where you have to download it all once, and then it's stored on your block storage and you just attach it without having to download anything. So hopefully that's as clear as I can make it, and that was the idea of recording this one. So thanks for listening.